Kathy Labrum is listed under Hugh Donahue's account.
Great, be up here. Anyone who is on our testimony list tonight, would be nice to have them on the front page as well.
Is Frank Giovanni on?
Frank just called Judy Lissa to say that his power went out, but he's hooking up his generator and should be on momentarily.
Oh, I was worried about that.
Luckily, he has a generator.
Yeah, tell me about it. Your other witness, Kathy, is she here?
I'm trying to look through.
Yes, I just moved her up.
Okay. Good, thank you. So folks, we'll start in a couple of minutes. Bear with us as we're trying to get our selves organized, and we're waiting on one witness to log on. Maggie, would you mind moving from Crawford to the first page as well? He's under, I think, Crawford.
Yes.
I can be on second, that's okay.
There he is. Thank you.
While we're waiting, I'd like to thank the board for allowing us to start at 6 p.m., hopefully, and for allowing us to start out of order. It allowed me to go visit my first grandchild.
Oh, how exciting.
It was very exciting. Sad to be back without him.
Kathy, when was he born?
He came 3 weeks early, and he came on March the 5th
Oh, okay.
out in San Francisco.
I thought it was yesterday. I had 3 women yesterday have baby boys that I'm friendly with. I was like, gosh, it must
Oh, wow.
But oh no, here's the 4th.
Frank just texted me that his power is back on.
Great,
And
thank
he's
you.
going to be logging on.
Frank is now on. I think Maggie can work to move him to the first page, but if Frank is now on, I think we're ready to begin, Carol. If we want to hit record.
Are we ready to go?
I believe so.
Great. So welcome everyone. My name is Carol DeWolf. I'm the chair of the Westtown Board of Supervisors. With me this evening, I have my Vice Chair, Scott Yaw, and the Police Commissioner, Richard Pomeranz. We have John Alcho, our Township Manager, and we thank Abby Dobbs for our production this evening, along with help from John as well. We also have Pat McKenna, our Township Solicitor, and Greg Edelman, Toll's representative, and others presenting tonight, which will be introduced. But I wanted to thank all of you who are joining us and have continued to join us with your interest, your involvement, and we thank you for that on this important matter. So I believe that's all. This is hearing number 11, and I'm going to turn it over to Pat.
Thank you, Carol. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the continuation of the hearing from March 23rd, 2021. The Township is recording the hearing this evening for assisting with the preparation of the transcript. The recording of the hearing will be destroyed after the transcript is complete. The next hearing is scheduled for May 26th at 7 p.m. Please note that tonight was an exception. We started a little early, but on May 26th, we will start at 7 p.m. No additional hearings have been scheduled at this time, but I expect to be working on that in the next couple of days for a date for June in the event it becomes necessary. As with all prior hearings, the proceedings tonight will mirror as closely as possible the process for an in-person hearing. Tonight, Thornbury Township intends to present 2 witnesses. All other parties and the board will have the opportunity to ask questions of the witnesses, and there will be the chance for redirect questioning by Thornbury Township. Once Thornbury Township has completed its case presentation, we will begin to move through our list of unrepresented parties to present any testimony or exhibits that they may have. If that finishes tonight, or when it finishes, Toll will be given a chance to present any rebuttal witnesses. That may begin tonight if there is enough time, or that may begin at the May hearing date or at a future hearing date. When asking your questions, you will be recognized and asked to unmute. If you're on the phone, please press star 9 to raise your hand and then star 6 to unmute. Exhibits will be shown on the screen as a witness testifies, and they are also available on the Township's website. We ask that you please enter your name on the Zoom call to assist the Township with properly identifying you when called upon to speak. Please make sure you're in a quiet location, and please speak up so that all may hear you. We ask that you please remain on mute unless you are speaking to reduce extraneous noise and feedback. Public comments will commence at a future hearing date after all of the parties have concluded their presentations. As has been our custom, we will plan to take a break around 7:30 this evening, and we conclude the hearing around 9 p.m., depending upon where a witness is with their testimony. I've been advised that Mindy Rhodes is recording the hearing this evening, and as such, I'll ask, is anyone else recording the hearing? If so, we ask that you please raise your hand.
I don't see any hands raised.
Thank you, Maggie. So with the housekeeping out of the way, I'm going to turn the proceeding over to Kathy Labram, Solicitor for Thornbury Township.
Good evening. Thornbury Township's first presentation would be Mr. Tabani, and Mrs. Camp and Mr. Adelman have stipulated to Mr. Tabani's qualifications as a traffic engineering expert for purposes of this hearing this evening.
Let me just ask real quick then, does anyone have an objection to Mr. Tabani being admitted as an expert in traffic engineering?
No.
No objection.
All right, he'll be so admitted. Thank you.
Mr. Tabani, I've marked two exhibits.
Hang on, Ms. Labram, we have to have him sworn in.
Mr. Tabani, do you swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Tabani, I've marked two exhibits, T1 and T2 for the record this evening. Can you identify those exhibits for us?
T1 is a letter dated April 14th, 2021 that I prepared, and T2 is my current curriculum vitae.
Can you explain for the board the nature and purpose of your current employment with Thornbury Township?
I am the township traffic engineer, and I am called upon as either necessary or requested by the township to assist with reviews of any traffic-related matters in the township.
And did the township ask you to review the revised Crebilly plans with the connector road and advise them in relationship to that planned connector road?
Yes, I've been involved with this application for a number of years now as well.
As a result of your work and your assistance, has the township determined to make changes to the intersection of Bridlewood Boulevard and Route 926 if the current connector road configuration is approved?
Yes, it has.
And can you describe those changes that Thornbury Township has determined to make?
Those changes include reconfiguring the intersection of Bridlewood Boulevard and 926 so as to prohibit cut-through traffic from using Bridlewood Boulevard. That could be a reconfiguration to include right-in, right-out only activity, for example, or possibly some other measure.
And turning to your report, which is marked T1, have you had the opportunity to observe the testimony of Ms. Klein and Mr. Frederico in this matter?
I have, and I've either done that or read the transcripts.
And have had an opportunity to review all of the relevant materials submitted by the parties to this hearing?
Yes.
And can you summarize for the board the findings that you've set forth in your report marked T1?
So T1 is a rather painstaking review of all the evidentiary record that you just mentioned. It includes citations and annotations of really years of traffic studies and other exhibits for the Crebilly site. You can see there on page 1 the numerous footnotes at the bottom of the page. The document essentially speaks for itself, but in summary, what it presents is that earlier studies of the Crebilly site included alternatives that had higher unit counts and therefore more traffic. And some of those earlier studies also did not make any mention of a connector road through its site or through Bridlewood Boulevard effectively, and concluded that those sites could operate with acceptable levels of service and acceptable impacts to off-site intersections, as well as acceptable performance of its own driveways. And since that time, the site has changed. It's reduced slightly in intensity. What had previously been a proposed connection on 926, Route 926, east of Bridlewood Boulevard, is now currently proposed to be aligned with Bridlewood Boulevard, and what had previously been no reliance on site traffic or Route 202 southbound cut-through traffic using Bridlewood Boulevard, both are now part of the plan. So what T1 does is it merely points out or concludes that essentially the applicant really has never relied on the credits that cut-through traffic presents to the operation of the site, even when the site was more intense. So it would be my recommendation to protect the health, safety, and welfare of existing residents at Bridlewood at Thornbury to not allow that cut-through activity and instead pursue what was an earlier plan which did not rely on using Bridlewood Boulevard for those purposes. As I mentioned, T1 has many references to the record. One of the things mentioned, for example, on T1, page 3, exhibit PC 28, which are meeting minutes from a meeting that was held at PennDOT early in 2020, is that PennDOT itself did not even object to Thornbury's desires to limit traffic going through Bridlewood Boulevard. In fact, not only did PennDOT acknowledge that was a desire by the township, but suggested, possibly using temporary measures to test it out, but certainly did not explicitly say don't do it. And in fact, a PennDOT representative, as documented in PC 28, went so far as to recognize that this cut-through seems to be of limited benefit. What he exactly said was it doesn't get you much further south on Route 202 anyway. So it seems like, from what I've gathered going through the record and hearing the transcript, hearing the witnesses and reading the transcripts, is the applicant doesn't have an objection to this. I don't think PennDOT has an objection to this. So I suggest that everyone work in a spirit of cooperation to make that happen.
And by working together, you mean to preclude the traffic on the connector route cutting through the site from proceeding through Bridlewood Boulevard and the local community there.
That's correct.
Have the traffic studies submitted to date in this matter or the testimony presented during these hearings taken into consideration the effect of the right-in, right-out configuration of the intersection of Bridlewood Boulevard with 926 and the 7,000-pound gross weight vehicle restriction on South New Street in Thornbury Township on the eventual intersection of Route 926 and South New Street?
To my knowledge and my review of the traffic studies, neither of those aspects have been considered or included in the studies submitted to date.
Mr. McKenna, I have no more questions for this witness.
Thank you, Ms. Labor. Mr. Edelman, any cross?
Yes, I have a couple of questions for Mr. Tavani. Good evening, Frank. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm sorry for that little hiccup earlier.
It's fine.
No.
Glad to see you. Your testimony with respect to the intersection design and the proposed collector road 926 and Bridlewood Boulevard, did that require consent of both Westtown Township and Thornbury Township in addition to PennDOT?
I don't know if changes within Thornbury Township, within its borders on its roadways, does require consent of an adjacent township. I honestly don't know the answer to that question. But I do believe in meeting minutes that have been documented, there was mention of working in a spirit of cooperation. And I think Toll even went so far as to offer to work with Thornbury Township in preparing potential alternative designs of the intersection.
I believe you're correct on that. With respect to the proposed designs that you would envision closing off Bridlewood or making it a right-in, right-out access, would you envision those improvements being constructed within the PennDOT right-of-way along 926?
That's certainly one possibility. Roadway design is admittedly a bit out of my wheelhouse. It's certainly something that PennDOT would have to weigh in on regardless, because the intersection, I believe, will still meet signal warrants, and PennDOT does have the authority throughout the Commonwealth, even on township roads, to review signal permit plans. So even if the proposed physical improvements fell outside of PennDOT rights-of-way, PennDOT review would still be part of the application.
And did you do any independent study or analysis of the actual trip distributions at that intersection?
No, I've only reviewed the trip distribution models that were part of the many traffic studies submitted on behalf of the application.
Okay. And isn't it true that in at least the original or initial traffic studies that were submitted by Toll with respect to this conditional use application, that a trip distribution of 0% was given to the Bridlewood traffic going through that intersection at 926, the collector road and Bridlewood?
That's absolutely true, and that's exactly one of my points, is that the earlier iterations of the traffic study, which featured a site that was somewhat more intense and therefore had more traffic, did not rely on any assignment of site traffic or an ad hoc Route 202 bypass traffic using Bridlewood Boulevard, and yet all the level of service standards per McMahon were met.
So then isn't it true, in your opinion, that if Bridlewood is closed off or cut through traffic, that would have no negative or adverse impact on the levels of service for the surrounding roadways?
That is exactly what the earlier studies support, that conclusion, and I have no reason to doubt that conclusion.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Edelman. Ms. Camp, any questions?
Yes. Hi, Frank. I'm not sure you answered Greg's question about whether PennDOT would have to approve your suggested intersection change to Bridlewood Boulevard and Route 926. Wouldn't PennDOT have to approve that?
Yes.
Okay. And the scoping meeting minutes that we had, or that I attended and representatives from Thornbury attended, there was discussion with PennDOT representatives, but we don't know sitting here tonight whether or not PennDOT would approve that. Is that correct?
That is correct. Although this really is, it's a kind of a mix of traffic engineering and legal issues. If a township roadway within the borders of a township are decided by the township not to allow through traffic, I don't really know exactly how that would play out with PennDOT. I would think that the township has its rights, and PennDOT has its rights and obligations as well. So it's kind of a gray area to me.
I'm assuming that there's a current highway occupancy permit for the existing intersection of Bridlewood Boulevard and Route 926 that would have to be revised if the, if your recommended change were to occur. So I would think in that regard, PennDOT would have to approve that.
Well, I believe that the applicant will have to prepare an HOP application for its proposed driveway along 926, which happens to be now proposed to be opposite this current township roadway. So I would imagine that as part of that HOP review application, there would be an opportunity to work together to effect the changes that Thornbury Township is requesting, and it appears that PennDOT has not outright rejected to this point.
And there's going to be a traffic light, I guess, on the west town side of the connector road where it intersects 926. And my understanding is that that traffic signal would be owned by Westtown Township. Is that your understanding?
Everything you said except for that last part about ownership is my understanding, but I have no reason to doubt what you just said.
So if ultimately PennDOT approved the design of Bridlewood the way you're suggesting it be revised, that would have to be taken into account in the permitting for that traffic signal, correct?
Yes.
Just so I'm clear, the proposal would not allow traffic leaving Bridlewood Boulevard to even go straight across 926. It would not allow northbound traffic to go onto the connector road, correct?
One option would be a fully channelized driveway, effectively, that would have channelization islands so that only right turn entering traffic can proceed onto Bridlewood Boulevard, essentially westbound traffic turning right, and then another channelization island for northbound or Bridlewood exiting traffic to turn only right as well. However, there may be other opportunities to design the intersection to prohibit the through movement that you just mentioned, but still somehow permit left turns in and out as well.
That's what I'm asking. Is your recommendation to have those channel islands put in so that the only movement you can make as you're leaving Bridlewood, traveling northbound to get to 926, is that you must turn right? Is that your recommendation?
I'm recommending that as one potential solution. Essentially, my recommendation is that Bridlewood Boulevard was never conceived as an ad hoc Route 202 bypass, so through traffic should be prohibited in some fashion. And that could include full channelization, so it's right in, right out only.
Through traffic, you mean through traffic traveling on the new connector road, crossing over 926 and entering into Bridlewood Boulevard. That's what you mean by through traffic, traveling southbound.
And northbound as well, but that is correct, Counselor, yes.
Okay. Nothing further, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Thompson, Mark Thompson, for Neighbors for Crebilly. I don't know if Mark is on or not.
Hello.
Hello, yes, who's this?
Vince Morrow from Neighbors for Crebilly. Mark Thompson is not with us tonight. We have nothing to add to this at the time.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Mr. Crawford, any questions for Birmingham?
Yes, a few, please. Frank, current provisions would allow a right turn and a left turn out of northbound Bridlewood Drive onto 926.
Yes, they do.
And so, if I understand correctly, you would also recommend disallowing a westbound left turn out of Bridlewood?
Northbound left turn out of Bridlewood, correct.
Yeah, northbound. Sorry. Any idea what the percentage of traffic traveling westbound is currently out of northbound Bridlewood?
Anticipating that question, I am looking at A42, page 55 of the PDF, which is figure 3A, existing peak hour traffic volumes per McMahon's study. And they show, for example, during the weekday AM peak hour, 45 vehicles making that left turn. So that's over the course of an hour. It's less than 1 per minute.
And if that were precluded, how would a resident of Bridlewood attain a westbound traverse across 926?
Well, this is speculation. Of those 45 vehicles, I don't know what their ultimate destination is. If they are destined, for example, to points north on New Street, their most reasonable alternative would possibly be to leave the Bridlewood community via the signalized intersection on Route 202 rather than the driveway on 926 and essentially turn left, head north on 202 and travel up to some point like 926 or maybe Pleasant Grove and turn left to arrive at New Street.
So normally, I would think that would not be considered a desirable alternative because it would increase already congested traffic on 202 at the intersection of 926.
Well, desirable is a subjective word, and I believe the community is probably considering the pros and cons of absorbing diverted southbound Route 202 through traffic through its community versus the potential inconvenience to a handful of traffic movements during peak and non-peak hours, such as what I just described. And I would also think that I'm again looking at page 55 of A42, according to this figure, there's approximately 3,000 vehicles per hour in both directions on Route 202 during either peak hour, actually during the morning peak hour. So not all of the 45 would take that path I described. There might be alternative paths the traffic would take. Say, for example, half of the traffic, or say 30 of the 45 ultimately meandered its way out to Route 202, I would submit that an increase of 30 vehicles over a baseline of 3,000 is an increase in traffic that the average motorist will certainly not notice and probably won't have any meaningful impact at all on operation.
Are you aware of any poll or just attitude survey of the residents of Bridlewood on that particular issue or similar issues?
I'm not aware of a poll, but I am aware that there is concern among the residents of the community regarding this cut-through traffic concept.
So, if a Bridlewood resident was traveling southbound on 202 and anticipating a lengthy tie-up at the intersection of 926, wanted to utilize the, call it the Toll Brothers connector road down to 926 and then across into home territory, Bridlewood, that would be precluded as well?
Yes, it would, and that goes back to what I said earlier about, weighing the pros and cons. There certainly would be an impact to mobility that affects not only cut-through activity, but resident activity as well. But on balance, it's probably more appropriate to inconvenience a small amount of existing traffic and in that community that may make that movement rather than host a significant amount of other traffic through the community.
Would a Bridlewood resident be able to traverse westbound on 926 from 202 and then make a left onto Bridlewood?
No.
No. So they would have to go.
I should say, as I testified earlier, I think it perhaps may be possible to design the site so that you could have rights in, rights out, perhaps lefts in and lefts out, but otherwise prohibit through traffic, as Ms. Camp mentioned, from Bridlewood to the Collector Road or from the Collector Road to Bridlewood. But I have not prepared any such designs or sketches. I'm just saying that it's potentially possible. If it was possible, then the movement you described could continue to occur as it does today. And once again, using applicant's handy A42, that movement that you're talking about amounts to 7 vehicles per hour during the AM peak hour. 7 westbound left turns from 926 onto Bridlewood Boulevard South. So that's a very small number indeed.
Has there been any consideration of utilizing traffic calming devices within Bridlewood Boulevard if, for example, PennDOT would require that it be a full-service intersection? In other words, to discourage through traffic but not prevent it?
There hasn't been any explicit consideration as you inquired. If that is something that a design was prepared and presented, it could certainly be reviewed. The thing about traffic calming is, what it really does is, as the name suggests, is reduce speed usually, sometimes effectively, sometimes only in spots, like when you have speed humps or speed tables. You might have a considerable reduction in speed in that immediate vicinity, but not necessarily along its entire length. That's a little different than what we're talking about. It's not so much a speed concern as it is a volume hosting concern. Again, this, as mentioned in T1, this existing community was never envisioned as being an ad hoc bypass to a major regional arterial, and the layout of the homes in the community encourages walking back and forth from one side to the other, crossing Bridlewood Boulevard, and to host regional through traffic through a road such as that does not seem compatible with how it's been designed.
Yeah. Actually, I was thinking more in terms, not so much of reducing speed, but per se, but in terms of reducing the desirability of anyone to use the cut through if it were available, which might actually, if it were effective, be a solution that would still allow more convenient ingress and egress to and from Bridlewood by the Bridlewood residents, as we've just discussed. That was just my thought, that if a non-Bridlewood resident, or I'm sorry, a non-Bridlewood motorist using the Toll Brothers access and arriving at 926, if that motorist knows that it's going to be longer time-wise to cut through Bridlewood rather than to turn left, go out to 202, then normally that motorist would not use the Bridlewood cutoff. That was just a thought that I had. Any comment on that?
Well, I mean, while that's certainly possible, it sort of seems to raise the question, then again, why permit the movement in the first place?
I'm thinking more of Bridlewood residents.
And I'm sure that they welcome and appreciate your consideration of their welfare. But I think that what they're really considering is the possibility that people don't conduct themselves in the manner you suggested they may, and what they can do, or what can be done to prohibit it entirely, rather than rely on a desire or a hope.
Okay, that's all the questions I have. Thanks, Frank.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Mr. Bevilacqua, do you have any questions for the school district or West Glen HOA?
No, I do not have any further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Spackman, any questions for Thornbury Farm Trust?
Yes, I do. Frank, with the design of 926 and South New Street, has there been any consideration between Westtown Township's design and Toll Brothers with the concern of Thornbury Farm Trust for the movement of equines and tractors across that intersection?
I really don't know. That's probably a better question for the applicant. From what I've seen in the submitted materials, there was no specific mention of equine movements.
With that, are you aware that Thornbury Farm Trust will not be providing any land for improvements along 926 and South New Street?
You're asking if I was aware of that?
Yes.
Yes, I was.
If there were no improvements done to that intersection, and it would all have to be done on the toll land, what would that intersection traffic flow potentially, what would that intersection look like potentially with a new development load on top of that?
Well, so at the outset, I'll remind that T1 does not make any specific mention of this intersection. However, I did previously review some submitted materials, probably about a year ago at this point, at New and 926. My recollection from what I did then is at one time the applicant was proposing to construct new left turn lanes in both directions on 926. And I believe I submitted a letter in which I reviewed and determined that those left turn lanes were in fact not warranted and not necessary under existing or future conditions. And that the applicant was also proposing a right turn lane in the westbound direction from 926 to North New Street or northbound New Street. And I believe that remains part of the plan. I would need to go through my own files to go any further into what their impact at that site is and whether that right turn movement alone, that new right turn lane rather, that they're offering alone mitigates their impact sufficiently. I believe it does, but I cannot